I left for California later. But before that, I spent my late teens on my dad's spread out in what felt like the middle of nowhere. Hollow Creek Ranch, an endless ribbon of pasture and sage that cut into Wyoming's dry air. The land was beautiful in the way a photograph is beautiful. Wide, sunburnt, and calm until you notice the edges. I never loved it. I found the quiet boring in a way that left my thoughts echoing. And as that old cartoon Courage the Cowardly Dog would warn, creepy things have a habit of picking the loneliest addresses. Dad Caleb had a habit of treating property like a sacred thing. He kept 3 guns in the house for that reason, not out of show, but because people wandered where they didn't belong. Once he'd chased a pair of men off the range with his rifle. The memory was a rough, proud story he told at the table, a tale that stiffened my spine every time. It set the tone for how we lived. Locks checked, gates latched, visitors assumed hostile until proven otherwise. What I'm about to tell happened one June that sat hot and heavy on the land. My parents were away on a vacation together, one of those rare indulgent trips, and my little brother Eli was out somewhere with friends or at his girlfriend's house. I didn't know which. The house was mine by default. The creak of the floors, the hum of the fridge, the way night fell like a blanket and stayed. I slept late in those years. On that night I was stretched on the living room couch, the window screens open to let the warm, thin air whisper through. A baseball game flickered on mute. The porch smelled faintly of cut hay and motor oil. Around 1 a.m, the motion-sensing patio light snapped to life, a broad square of harsh white unrolling along the back deck. That light didn't come on for moths or cars. It came on for bodies. My first thought was Eli, trudging home late. I peered through the blinds. The yard was a black field, folded under the halo of the lamp. No silhouette moved in the dark. I called Eli on the phone. No answer. I texted him a half-joke. "If this is you, don't let me catch you." My thumb hovered over the screen, and then I sat back down. Then a knock came at the front door. We had a peephole because the drive to the house was long, and anyone who hunted this far usually wanted something. I eased toward it, half expecting a prank, neighborhood kids playing ding-dong ditch, or Eli with his dumb grin. Nothing. The peephole showed only black, a smear of depth. The air felt suddenly smaller. I shut the blinds tight, a private fortress sewn from fabric and hope, and texted Eli again, this time with a bit of heat. "If that's you, I'm not opening." The house made its usual idle sounds, pipes, a far-off owl, but my jaw went tight. Being watched has a way of making the world shrink until the watching thing fills every inch. Moments later, a knock erupted behind my head so loud I jumped. It wasn't the front door this time. It was the living room window next to the couch. A precise, brutal hammering, followed immediately by 2 voices layered and simultaneous. One low and coarse, the other higher, breathy and almost sing-songy, saying, in unison, "We see you." For a second I wanted to believe it was Eli and his girlfriend screwing with me. The wish for normalcy is a stubborn stranger. When fear arrives, you sometimes grab at whatever thin thread of ordinary will hold. But the voices had no warmth, only a pressure that pushed air out of my chest. The banging slid down the house and started on another pane, the dining room window where the blinds had been left open. Through the uncovered glass, I could see two shadowed figures pressed flat against the pane. Their shapes were human enough, but no face resolved, only smears and the suggestion of shoulders hunched against the glass, as if sheltering from a wind I couldn't feel. I didn't stare at them. I ran to Dad's room, hurtling up the stairs with my heart in my throat, and fished a rifle from beneath his bed where he kept it loaded for emergencies. Caleb had said, matter of fact, if you ever need it, you know where it is. I did. My hands were clumsy and my breath was a ragged thing as I chambered around and felt the old cold metal sit heavy in my palms. The rifle gave me a kind of stupid confidence I'd never known I could lean on. I crept back downstairs, checking corners like a child playing grown-up, and went to the dining room window where the figures had been. The glass was damp with fog left by palms that had been there moments before, prints smeared into transparent smudges. But when I pulled the curtains aside, the porch was empty and the night kept its secrets. I stepped outside into the porch light and did a slow, methodical lap around the house. The cattle were grazing in silhouette, their low calls sliding off the dark. Everything looked normal and wrong at once. Fields and fences bored and ordinary, yet each shadow seemed to hold a promise of movement. I checked every lock, every bolt, and after walking the perimeter, I let myself in. I went upstairs and fell into bed, with the rifle propped against the nightstand, a ridiculous sentinel. For about half an hour, peace held. I fooled myself into thinking adrenaline would drain away, and the world would resume its honest shape. Then, like a stone dropped into still water, a new sound reverberated through the house, frantic, relentless pounding at the front door below, and some man screaming with the raw animal pitch of someone who has nothing left but the sound. My muscles tightened like sprung wire. I grabbed the rifle and shoved the living room window up, the cheap frame protesting, and fired into the darkness without aiming for anything specific. Just a sharp, singular warning that broke the night like glass. The pounding stopped mid-beat. Two sets of boots stamped across the porch and away into the dark, heavier than ghosts, and gone in seconds. The night settled back, punctuated only by crickets. I went back upstairs and tried to sleep, the rifle still warm from my hands. The rest of that night nothing else happened. In the morning I learned it hadn't been Eli or his girlfriend at all. Dad was proud when I told him what I'd done. Proud in the way men wear that kind of conviction. I was relieved too. Grateful the guns existed. Grateful I remembered where one was. But something in the house had shifted. The knock, the voices, the prints on the glass. They left a residue you can't scrub off with daylight. After that night, the ranch stopped feeling like a refuge and started feeling like a stage set. Everything in place, but wrong in the way a painted backdrop is wrong when the lighting changes. For days afterward, I walked the yard in long loops, checking latches, testing gates, and looking for footprints that could make sense. The porch light kept me honest. It threw the world into a hard, impartial clarity, and sometimes that clarity revealed nothing but the ordinary. Moth wings, cattle prints, the heel of a boot where the wind had nudged the soil. Other times it revealed smudges and shapes that refused to fit. Sleep was a petty thing I could no longer afford. My nights unstitched into small, watchful pieces, the slow drip of a condensation line, the fridge's soft groan, the distant river of highway sound. Every little noise took on the personality of threat. A branch scratching the roof turned into a hand tracing the shingles. The clink of a loose hinge became the methodical note of someone testing entry points. My mind learned how to rationalize and how to invent at the same time, building scenarios like a mason piles bricks, some real, some fiction, all heavy. One night, a week after the first pounding, I woke to a sound that lodged in bones rather than ears, whispering, layered and insistent, like breath skimmed across the back porch in a language made of syllables and rust. It threaded through the house, curl by curl, settling under the floorboards and in the hollow spaces of walls. I lay frozen, listening to the syllables come and go until a pattern emerged, a clipped phrase repeated with tiny variations, the sound like someone trying different keys in a lock. We see you, we see you. The cadence was wrong too, even, like practice speech. And then underneath it a second voice, quieter, slipped in. Don't know where to go. It felt mechanical and personal at once, the way a funeral bell is both an object and a verdict. I grabbed the rifle and walked the house without turning on the lights. The safety of the flashlight beam was a pity. It made shadows denser outside of its cone. In the kitchen, the back door was locked, deadbolt engaged, but the bolt had a fine rust-brown smear where someone had dragged a hand. On the dining room glass there were fresh semicircular smudges, as if someone had leaned their cheek to the pane and breathed. The prints were too low for my father, too narrow for me. They suggested smallness or something knuckled in a way a normal hand is not. That detail lodged in me like a splinter. At dawn I found whispers of other signs, a single deliberate scratch along the banister, an arc that began wide and narrowed like a claw, plus the faint drag marks on the back step that pointed away from the house in a neat, patient line. The tracks disappeared where the pasture met sage, and the night made everything flat again. I walked that line with my boots, looking for disturbance in the dirt, for a shoe print, a cigarette butt, anything to prove this wasn't someone's fantasy. I found nothing but the long, clean print of an animal's paw, and later a small scrap of paper nailed to the fence with a rusty tack. One crooked scribble on it. We see you. People in town started noticing me looking tired. Caleb grumbled, proud that I'd used his rifle and calm that I had taken it seriously, and offered practical comfort in the form of extra batteries, a new lock, and a long lecture about being careful around strangers. My mother called when she could. Her voice carried a softness that did not reach the innards of my worry. Friends stopped dropping by. The farmhouse became a place of fewer witnesses, which only made the house's strange guests bolder. There was one night I will never clear from memory. The heat had finally relented, and a wind moved across the pasture that sounded like far-off water. I sat on the back porch with a blanket over my knees, the rifle leaning beside me. The radio was low. The corn stalks in the field moved as if they were having a secret conversation. Somewhere behind me a vehicle passed on the distant county road headlights, slicing the horizon like two bright eyes. Then the dog began to bark. Not my dog, not any dog I knew, but a frantic, layered chorus that came from different parts of the property at once, barks that were out of sync, each one starting and stopping as if being cued. The hair on my arms tightened. The porch light flicked, as if someone hands-on had bumped the sensor, and in that uneven strobe the night peeled away like an onion. For a heartbeat I saw figures, not full, but enough. Curved shoulders, a tilt of heads, the suggestion of faces turned toward the house. They stood beyond the fence in the pale spill of the road, far enough away to be convenient illusions. They did not move to come closer. They hummed instead, a sound between a chant and a tune, and then at once the entire line began to clap soft, deliberate slaps against the air that traveled toward the house in a wave. My breath turned quick and mechanical. The clap came again, closer, now from the fence line, and then from the porch rail, and then, worse, from the living room window right beside me. Someone knocked there. 3 hard, deliberate raps, then pause, then 3 again. The pattern made my teeth ache. It felt ritualized. I could have called the deputies. I could have stayed out there and faced whatever that was with the gun leveled and steady. Instead, fear braided itself with a small, stupid hope. Maybe they were just kids. Maybe Eli. Maybe neighbors with a dare. I stayed put, frozen, until the knocking melted back into the sound of the wind and the clapping stopped. When I finally dared to stand and check, the porch was empty. Nothing but the last wisp of a footprint in the mud at the edge of the field. The heel narrow, the toes splayed strangely, like a foot that had been squeezed. The porch light hummed. The radio played a song that did not match the night. I began to sleep with the rifle by my bed every night after that, eyes flicking to the window, listening for the low, coordinated chant that felt as if it could be mapping me, assigning me a role in something I had not chosen. The house kept its secrets as well as it could. Paint chips, hairline cracks, the subtle resignation of a floorboard having been trod by a weight that didn't belong. Each morning I told myself daylight would do what it promised: repair, explain, absolve. Daylight never did any of those things. It only made the residue of night more stubborn and precise. By the time the sun stopped convincing the world it was harmless, the ranch felt like a place kept on a hair trigger. Days were work and lists. Nights were patrols of the porch light and the perimeter. I stopped leaving the back door propped. I checked every lock twice. The rifle was no longer an emergency talisman. I kept in a closet. It sat by the couch like something waiting to be used, heavy and honest. I slept less. My thoughts learned to scout ahead of themselves, searching for exits, for mistakes to correct before they could be exploited. A week after the first night, the sound stepped up in precision. It began small, a rhythmic tapping at the kitchen window that matched the cadence of my own pulse, then a whisper threaded through the eaves like someone reading letters off a list. I lay awake and listened to the house, rehearsed the noises, and tried to tell myself they were cows, wind, or a truck far away. Logic could not erase the way those sounds had agency, as if they were being arranged by an unseen hand. One night I decided to confront the pattern. I propped the back door ajar by just an inch and sat on the couch with the flashlight and the rifle across my knees. The porch light made a square of pale safety on the deck's boards. Everything beyond it was a throat of black. The air tasted of dust and cut grass. The radio was off. My fingers found the trigger and kept a soft, steady pressure that felt like a promise. At 3 a.m, the clap started. A single hard knock at the dining room window. Then 3, then pause, then 3 again, and in between the knocks a hiss of breath that was not quite human. Under the pattern another voice, threaded low, layered, saying, "We see you." Closer now, as if the speakers had been turned up, and the sound crawled through the siding and into the house's bones. My heart tried to run a race it could not win. I moved toward the window, flashlight angled down, and for a moment there was nothing but my own reflection and the square of glass. Then something slid into view at the edge of the light, a handprint, pale against the dark, smeared and small, the fingers too long and the palm too narrow. Another handprint hovered below it, and another, like the marks of someone who had traced the frame methodically. I felt foolishly, dangerously, that I was watching the hand of whoever had been pressing their cheek to the glass earlier. The prints were cold to think about, cold in the way a wound is cold before it scabs. The knock returned, harder now, then the 2 voices in a harmony that felt practiced. The higher voice sang a single line, an almost playful cadence, while the lower voice supplied punctuation like a metronome. "We see you." The glass began to fog faintly as breath met cold pain. Then, with a sound like silk dragged across wood, something leaned against the window and slowly turned its head, not to look at me, but to listen for motion inside. I caught the suggestion of a face pressed to the glass, too thin, the features smeared like someone had tried to draw through fog, and my stomach flipped. Adrenaline is an unreliable friend. I jerked, raised the rifle, and fired a single shot through the window, not aiming at a body, but at the margin of the dark outside. The report cracked the night like a gunshot in a canyon and shattered the echo of the voices. The clamor stopped so abruptly it left a hollowness, the kind that is worse than sustained terror because it is the sound of attention severing. Footsteps retreated, a ragged breath or two, and then the night folded back over the ground as if nothing had happened. In the morning, the glass was still. No prints, no breathing fog. The curtain sagged where I had yanked it aside too quickly. The only evidence left was a thin, triangular chip at the lower corner of the pane, spidered veins in the glass where the bullet had nicked it, and a smear on the outside rail like a fingertip dragged away in haste. The sheriff's truck came again. They took notes, photos, and said the words you expect. They'd increase patrols, check the fence line, and ask neighbors if anyone had seen anything unusual. They wore professional faces that did not translate into answers. That night I dreamed of hands. I dreamed of small, practiced movements, taps, knocks, smears, as if someone had learned my rhythms and was making a map of them. I woke, convinced the sounds had names and could be recited. I began to move through the house like a sleepwalker, checking windows, listening to the undersound behind the drywall. Sometimes when I paused long enough, I heard something that sounded suspiciously like counting, soft syllables that rose and fell, voices enumerating stops along a route. Window, they said in the hush. Porch, rail, door. It felt like a route list read by someone planning. The words were not aimed at me so much as recorded, cataloged. A month passed. The calls to the sheriff slowed. People stopped asking about it at the store. Life rearranged around the idea that the ranch was simply a place with a bad night. I tried to do the same, feed the cattle, patch a fence, start the tractor, but the memory had teeth. On a morning when the sky was a brittle blue, I found something nailed to the post of the back gate. a small, torn page from someone's notebook. On it, in hurried, uneven letters, were 2 words, "We see." No exclamation, no punctuation, just the sentinel statement. I took that paper to my father. We stood on the porch and held it between us like evidence of both insult and intent. He folded the page, put it in his pocket, and told me in the way men tell things away. We'd board up the lower windows and install a sensor that would wake the whole valley if someone crossed the lane. He doubled the lock on the workshop and stayed later to check the gates. There was comfort in action. There was a quiet shame in knowing wars are often made of paper, and the people who write their plans. But even those measures felt small against the scale of what had happened. The voices had not been human in their certainty. The patterns were too regular, too ritual. At night I began to understand that being watched was not only a physical exposure, but a rewriting of where you felt safe. The ranch had been a world with borders, and something had learned the borders and tapped them like a clock. After the paper on the gate, something in the night changed shape from nuisance into intent. Precautions became rituals, bolts checked in the same order, lights left on at odd angles to cut the yard into manageable squares, the rifle cleaned and set where my hands could find it in the dark without thinking. My father set motion sensors that screamed if anything larger than a rabbit crossed a lane. He bolted shutters and taught me how to listen for the particular geometry of a footstep that belonged to a person and one that did not. Those lessons were practical calculus for keeping flesh and fence intact, but they did not stitch the other things back together, the feeling that my life had been measured and cataloged without my consent. One night in late July, the heat finally cracked and rain came hard enough to blur the horizon. I sat by the window watching it pool on the porch boards, trying to be brave about the small, stupid things like chores I still had to do. The radio was a soft static, and the house smelled of wet hay. I kept expecting the knocking to start again, some rehearsed performance, but the rain drowned everything into a steady, blank roar. Shortly after midnight, the porch light blinked once, and the sensor quit. At first I thought it was power. The thermostat clicked. Then, slow and deliberate, a new sound threaded through the rain. Someone walking the length of the fence, as if reading it with their feet. The steps were soft but too regular, like someone counting the posts. I grabbed the rifle and went out onto the porch with my jacket hood up, the rain making me a pale shape illuminated by the porch lamp. Faint through the water beyond the fence, a row of shapes stood in the shallow wash of the road, wayward silhouettes that could have been people or coats hung on stakes. The figures stayed motionless, but their presence moved like a weather front toward the house. I felt the old sick pressure of being looked at, not just seen, but drawn into a line of sight worked like thread through a loom. The nearest of the shapes stepped forward in a slow, ceremonial way and knocked on the air above its head. 3 beats, pause, 3 beats. The ritual that had dug into my nights for weeks. Only this time, instead of voices, the sound that rode the knocks was a scrape like fingernails finding wood at exactly the places where the grain runs soft. I had had enough. I fired over the fence. No aim, only noise meant to announce presence. And for a second the night exploded with sound. The silhouettes blurred and then staggered back. One collapsed into the shoulder of another, and then all of them turned and moved away into the rain, as if wind had taken them. Sopping footprints led to the edge of the road and disappeared like a wet painting rinsed under a tap. In the morning, the yard was full of marks. Prints ringed the porch in a circle. Narrow heels and splayed toes that refused to match any boot in the house. On the porch rail was another scrap of paper, folded like an offering. Inside was a childlike drawing of a house with a crooked door and a window with a single eye staring out. Scribbled beneath in uneven, capital letters were the words, "We see, we wait." No punctuation. No sign of a face to pin this to. No way to know whether the hand that had written those letters was steady or shaken. My father wanted to call in favors, bring men with flashlights and dogs to fan the fields. He wanted reports filed, cameras installed, a light on every fence post. I wanted the same things, I told him, anything to anchor the house back to the ordinary. But there was another undercurrent, a sense that these measures would at best be cosmetic, that what watched us had learned the safe responses and would adjust. We could lock doors, but it had already typed our reactions into a pattern it could use. Weeks became months. The sheriff visited less often. The scrap of paper dried and browned in a drawer. The prints in the mud faded, replaced by herds and storms and other footprints. Life resumed a shape that was prosaic. Chores, nights in town, lamps turned on when I felt brave. I moved to California eventually, because the world there had more noise, more faces, more reasons for human things to happen, and Ridgefall softened into memory the way a scar fades to a pale line. Yet some residues do not go away. The last time I visited, years after I'd left, the porch felt smaller and older, as if the house had gathered the patience of loneliness while I was gone. I walked to the back gate, and the sun threw long shadows across the lane. For a half-second I thought I heard the faint cadence of a hand against glass. 3 taps, pause, 3 taps. So precise it could have been a clock. I told myself it was wind. I told myself the old nervousness was a habit, a muscle memory that lived in the back of the throat. On the top step, someone had left a scrap of paper. My fingers went cold before I unfolded it, but curiosity is a poor substitute for sense. The paper had a single small drawing, a house, 1 crooked window, the door ajar. In the corner, in letters that wavered like breath on a cold night, someone had written, "Don't know where to go." I folded the paper and put it in my pocket. I closed the gate. My boots pressed the same grass my father used to walk, and the path back to the truck felt ordinary underfoot. For a moment, as I drove away, the ranch fell behind me like a painting. The road hummed under the tires, warm and indifferent. Then, at the edge of my vision as the sun lobbed itself into the sky, a single dust mote caught a slant of light and elongated, thin as a finger. It drifted toward the crack between the boards of the porch and paused. For an instant it shivered, like a leaf deciding which way to fall, and from the silence there came a whisper, so soft I barely heard it, a rasp threaded with sleep and seasons. "Don't know where to go.